All right.
Let's talk about game tuning for a little while. We're getting ready to finalize a lot of the game components, particularly the difficulty in the classes and the monsters. We're making a lot of improvements to the monsters. I'm going to be talking a lot about changes that we've made since the beta, as well as changes that we've made since last year's BlizzCon. For those of you who don't know, a lot of the content for killing monsters in Diablo is based around rares and champions, and they have magical properties like Electrified or Plagued, Teleporter, Desecrator. We have a couple of new affixes that we've been putting into the game over the last few weeks. One of those new ones is actually on display in the video over here. It's called Mortar. Mortar is, the monster has the ability to lob these grenades. We felt like a lot of the affixes that are currently in there penalize melee much more than ranged, things like Electrified and Plagued. So Mortar actually shoots grenades a minimum distance. So if you're, let me go back on that. If you're a melee character, the grenades will actually fly right over your head. Moving on to some passive skills, we're going to talk about the classes. A lot of the focus has been on making passives good. We've had feedback that some of the passives are interesting, but some of them aren't so interesting. Some of the classes don't all seem to have equally interesting number of passives. Here's one of the new passives that we've got for the Barbarian. One of the things about passives is they actually serve a number of purposes. Some people want passives that support specific builds. Some people want passives that introduce cool new visual elements. In this case, we felt that it was important for a Barbarian to be able to have a defensive build option, and we also felt that it might be instructional for players who aren't sure if a Barbarian could be built in a tanky sort of way, so we have this new passive Nerves of Steel to help support that playstyle. Some of our other passives, this one's on the Witch Doctor, Fetish Sycophants. It summons one of the little fetish helpers to fight along your side, and this happens anytime you cast a physical skill. It's things like Poison Dart or Plague of Toads, 3% chance in every cast, so that's a really popular passive internally as well. Another passive I have here is Combination Strike. So if you guys remember the Spirit Generators, this one's a monk skill. In the past, we've called them combo skills. Combo skills, Spirit Generators, sort of interchangeable. In this case, if you use multiple different Spirit Generators together, you get a DPS increase. And the more Spirit Generators you combine together, the larger the increase. I'm going to go through some of the classes now and talk about them. Oh, sorry, one more thing. Synergy. So this is an interesting thing that's come up over the last few months as we've been tuning passives. Is the situation where you have too much synergy can actually be bad. So the example that we have on the board, up on the PowerPoint, is counterattack. Whenever you dodge, you automatically damage your attacker. Sixth Sense, which gives you increased chance to dodge, and Evasive, which gives you an increased chance to dodge every time you critical strike. Each one of these passives is pretty cool on its own, but when you put them all together, we felt like it was actually taking away build diversity rather than increasing it. Because as soon as you took one passive, you had a synergistic advantage for taking a second one, and then the third one. And if we give you 3 passives to choose from out of 15, we're actually pigeonholing players rather than allowing them to explore. So we've been seeking out these sorts of overly synergistic passives and removing them. Talk about the Barbarian. So for those of you who've played the Barbarian in the beta, Barbarian we feel like is in a pretty good place. He's fun, he's visceral, he's doing a lot of things that we want to do. A couple specific areas that we wanted to target. One was Fury Generation. He has a couple of Fury Generator skills, and we felt like his small, spammable generators weren't paying off as well as his big generators. So for example, players were using Leap Attack, Ground Stomp, Warcry, and skipping some of the Fury Generators like Cleave and Frenzy and Bash. So we've kind of adjusted those numbers a little bit to try and provide a better balance there. Another area that we've been looking at is survivability. You didn't see it so much during the level 1 to 12 game, but as you started to get into higher difficulties, Nightmare, Hell, Inferno, we really found that Barbarians were having trouble staying in melee. The Barbarians need to be in melee range to do damage, and without the survivability, they just weren't able to do that. So we've been looking at survivability, like I said, the passive earlier on. We've been also looking at the Barbarians' base stats, and just looking to kind of make them a little tougher overall. The Wizard, also in a good place. For those of you, again, who've been following along, we have a set of skills that were called academic skills. We've renamed those to signature skills. It's the same idea. Basically, as you level up, the skills become cheaper. Eventually, they become free. We really like how that's playing out. Overall, the Wizard's feeling pretty good. One of the areas that is a concern for us is whether or not it is worthwhile to use a signature spell when you're out of arcane power, and whether or not it's worth using a non-signature spell to spend your arcane power. So we've been tweaking those numbers to make sure players feel like they actually have different reasons to use different spells. And finally, one of the major changes that we've been making is all of the Wizard and Witch Doctor spells have been converted over to do % weapon damage. A major reason for this is we really felt that the casters needed to value their weapon more. People were finding weapons and looking at it and saying, well, I don't really care about the stats on this sword because my skills don't use it. So it's all based on weapon damage. One of the questions we get all the time is, well, then should my wizard just use a giant two-handed mace? Because I don't want to hold a two-handed mace. Well, in addition to being based on weapon damage, we also use the weapon's speed to determine your casting speed. So if you use like a wand or a fast dagger, then you'll actually cast faster as well. Talk a little bit about the Witch Doctor. Witch Doctor lover over here. One of the questions we get also is about mana. People have noticed that in the beta, mana seems to be unlimited. This, in the beta, is absolutely true. The mana gameplay that we want, mana is the only resource that's returning from Diablo II. So what we're doing with it is we're providing multiple mechanisms for the Witch Doctor to recover mana. In this case, one of those would be passives. There's a number of passives that have to do with mana regeneration. There's also runes, and some of the runes will help out with mana regeneration or making some of the skills cheaper to cast. And then there is items. You get mana regeneration and items. The goal here is that players will choose a mix of different avenues to supplement their mana regeneration. So one Witch Doctor might decide to use a number of skill runes as their source of mana regeneration. Others might rely on gear. Another might take passives. Some Witch Doctors might actually do all three and go way overboard. Now the question is, will that Witch Doctor who just puts everything into mana recovery have unlimited mana? And the answer is actually yes, because we want lots of customizable builds. The Witch Doctor who decides they don't want to have to mess around with mana and overloads on it will probably sacrifice some offensive ability or utility to do so, but will at least get to play in a way that's fun for them. Unfortunately, a lot of this play isn't really evident in the beta. The passives just start to kick in at level 10, a lot of the gear doesn't have a lot of mana regeneration on it yet, and the skill runes aren't in yet, so you won't see any of that. So from level 1 to 10, before any of this gameplay really kicks in, we basically make mana unlimited and free because the player hasn't been given the tools to overcome a shortage of mana yet. I'm going to talk about the passives. We talked about Fetish Sycophants earlier. Another new passive on the Witch Doctor is called Circle of Life. Circle of Life makes it so that whenever an enemy near you dies, it automatically summons a zombie dog. And what's really cool about that is you don't even have to have the zombie dog skill trained. If you have the passive Circle of Life and an enemy dies, and there's a chance that the zombie dog comes out. If you take the zombie dog skill, then you get to add runes, and the passive will benefit from that as well. This particular Witch Doctor in the video took both Circle of Life and Fetish Sycophants. So using only 2 passive skills, she actually has quite a big pet army with her. Moving on to the Monk. One big concern in the beta is survivability of the Monk. We've been working on, particularly during the early levels. During our internal testing, we actually find the Monk has a lot of good survivability later in the game, but that's only when a lot of the skills have unlocked. Early on, monks were having a hard time. So we've been doing very targeted, focused changes on certain of early combo skills, like Fists of Thunder, does a small bit of knockback on the 3rd hit now. Long Reach is slightly longer in its reach. All these sorts of things are just kind of micro adjustments that help improve the survivability of the Monk. The other area that we've been looking at is mantras. A lot of players understand that the fundamental concept is that it's a buff that's on yourself and others, but there wasn't any really good decision point as to when you were going to push the button. So for the first 3 seconds after pushing, turning on, activating your mantra, the effect of the mantra is actually doubled. So for example, if you have a mantra that increases the damage taken by all enemies near you, at the time that you push the button, now the effect of that mantra is doubled, and you can actually unleash some of your high cooldown powers, seven-sided strikes, stuff like that. And finally, we've been taking a hard look at combo attacks, spirit generators. Like I said, we use those terms interchangeably. In this case, we had some players who said they just want to have one spirit generator and they want to spam it all the time. And then we have other players who say, well, actually, I really like the idea of combining the two. And so that's been kind of a delicate balance, trying to support both styles. I mentioned the passive earlier. So we've been really looking at changing the timing, changing the structure, to basically make it possible to combine them, but not mandatory. And finally, with the Demon Hunter, for those of you who don't know, the Demon Hunter is based around a dual resource system of both hatred and discipline. Hatred is an offensive resource, and discipline is a tactical resource. We're moving over to a system of using both hatred generators and hatred spenders. The idea is that really in the beta, you're always out of hatred. You're like shooting, you use up all your hatred, and then all of a sudden now you have to use your normal attack again. And that just wasn't very fun. So now we've divided up all the hatred skills. Some of them generate hatred. Those tend to be more utility-oriented skills or plinking skills. And then we have hatred spenders. These tend to be your big bombs or have extremely strong effects. Another area that we've been looking at for the Demon Hunter is snares. The Demon Hunter is a ranged class, and we really wanted to make sure the Demon Hunter had tools to keep enemies at range. We considered adding additional root, and we've used that in small amounts, but we didn't want to give the Demon Hunter too much stun. That's not really part of her kit. So in this case, we've strengthened all of her snares. Just like a couple percentage points, but it actually makes a huge difference, and when you're actually playing, you can really keep those enemies at bay. Finally, we've been cranking up the awesome on all of the classes. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes we're really happy with the mechanic and how something's playing out. Maybe we like the mechanics and the numbers of how our skill works, but for whatever reason, it's not delivering on the visceral fantasy. And so we've been working a lot with our technical art department to basically amp up the visuals, amp up the feel, amp up the effects, so that the skill still functions mechanically the way we want, but has a lot more appeal.